At the most prestigious black tie gala in Seoul, hundreds of powerful figures gathered beneath crystal chandeliers, champagne in hand, believing they already knew every name worth knowing in that room. They were wrong. One woman stood near the edge of the ballroom, quiet, alone, black, American, and carrying a secret so enormous it would have cracked the marble floor beneath their feet if they had known. Her name was Amara Bennett, and the man who once threw her away like yesterday's newspaper was already walking toward her with that same smile he always used when he wanted to make someone feel small. If you want to know what happened next, stay until the very end, and drop a like, then comment the city where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Fuck. The dress cost more than Amara had spent on clothes in the previous 3 years combined, and she still wasn't sure she'd made the right choice wearing it. It was deep burgundy, fitted without being theatrical, cut at a length that suggested confidence rather than performance. She'd spent 20 minutes in her hotel bathroom staring at herself in the mirror before she put it on, and another 10 after, looking for the version of herself that didn't feel like a fraud walking into a room full of people who had decided long ago that she didn't belong in it. She put on the dress anyway. The Seoul Imperial Foundation Gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Sejong Palace Hotel, a building whose lobby alone cost more to construct than most people earned in a decade. It sat in the heart of Gangnam, all glass and pale stone, and when the black car dropped Amara at the entrance, she stood for exactly 2 seconds on the steps before she made herself move. Not because she was afraid, because she understood something that most people in that building didn't. That hesitation read like weakness from a distance, and distance was all these people ever used to judge you. She handed her invitation to the attendant at the door, received a practiced smile, and walked in. The ballroom opened up in front of her like something out of a film. Gold-trimmed ceiling, chandeliers the size of small cars, 200 people arranged in careful clusters, each cluster its own universe of negotiated alliances and carefully maintained appearances. A string quartet worked through something classical near the far wall. Waiters moved between the guests with a choreography that took years to make look effortless. Amara took a glass of water from the nearest tray and found a position near the left side of the room where she could see the full floor without being immediately visible from the entrance. She had learned to do that. Find the vantage point, know the exits, understand the room before the room understood you. It took less than 4 minutes before the whispers started. She heard her name first from a cluster of women near the floral arrangement. Amara Bennett said in Korean, then repeated in English for someone who needed the clarification. She didn't look in their direction. She already knew what they were saying because she had anticipated it before she walked through the door. They remembered her. Not because of anything she had done in the years since she'd lived in Seoul. Not because of her work as a structural design consultant. Not because of the projects she'd managed across 3 countries. Not because of any contribution she'd made to anything that actually mattered. They remembered her because of Ethan Caldwell, and the specific shape of the ending of that relationship, and how public that ending had been. She had been engaged to him for 8 months. 8 months during which she had believed, with the specific and embarrassing certainty of a woman who had not yet learned better, that what they had was something permanent. She had moved to Seoul for him, left a position in Chicago that she had worked 6 years to build, packed her apartment into 12 boxes, and followed a man she thought knew what he wanted. He had known exactly what he wanted. It just hadn't turned out to be her. The engagement ended 3 days after he met Soo-yeon Park, whose family controlled the 4th largest financial holdings company in South Korea. He'd told Amara over dinner at a restaurant she'd chosen because it was his favorite. He hadn't even looked particularly sorry, just purposeful, the way he always looked when he'd made a business decision and was delivering the terms. She had not cried in front of him. She had cried later, alone in the apartment they'd been planning to share, sitting on the floor of the bathroom because it was the only room where she couldn't see anything he'd helped her pick out. She had cried for 2 hours, and then she had gotten up, washed her face, and started making different plans. That had been 3 years ago. She heard Ethan before she saw him. His laugh was distinctive, a half-second too long, pitched at a volume calibrated for the people nearby rather than the person he was laughing with. She'd spent 8 months learning the difference between his real laugh and his performance laugh. And what she heard now was pure performance. She turned slightly and located him across the room. He looked the way success looked when it was mostly surface. Tailored charcoal suit, hair shorter than she remembered, a kind of physical confidence that came from being told too many times that you were impressive. He stood with a group of men near the center of the room, the cluster arranged in that particular formation that meant he was the one people were listening to rather than the one doing the listening. Beside him stood a woman. Soo-yeon Park, now Soo-yeon Caldwell, apparently, was precisely as beautiful and precisely as expensive-looking as Amara had been told she would be. Ivory gown, jewelry that didn't need to be ostentatious because the quality announced itself, posture that had been corrected since childhood. She was laughing at something Ethan had said, but her eyes were moving across the room with the practiced scan of someone who was always watching the social temperature. Amara turned back toward the window and finished her water. She was not here because of Ethan. She was here because the Seoul Imperial Foundation's annual gala was the single most effective networking event in the city for anyone operating in infrastructure and commercial development, and she had 3 prospective project partnerships she needed to move forward on before the end of the quarter. She had a job to do. The fact that her ex-fiancé was in the same room was a complication she had accounted for and decided was manageable. She was wrong about how manageable it would be. She had moved to the east side of the room and was in the middle of a conversation with a Singaporean architect named Daniel Lim when she felt the shift in the air behind her. Not a sound exactly, more a change in the quality of the attention in the room, and she knew before she turned around that Ethan was approaching. Daniel Lim's eyes moved just slightly to the left, the kind of involuntary adjustment people made when they spotted something they didn't know whether to acknowledge. Amara set her glass down on a passing tray and turned around. Ethan stopped about 3 feet away. He was smiling. The specific smile she remembered from the moments when he wanted something, dressed up to look like warmth. "Amara," he said, "I didn't know you were back in Seoul." "I've been in and out," she said. "Business." "Right." He glanced around her, a quick sweep that was meant to look casual and wasn't, looking for whoever she was with, finding no one. "You're here alone?" "I'm here for work." "Of course." He tilted his head slightly. "It's good to see you. You look good." The pause before good was doing a lot of work. She didn't respond to it. "How are you, Ethan?" "Honestly, really well." He said it the way people said it when the point wasn't the honesty. It was the really well. "Soo-yeon and I just got back from 3 weeks in Monaco. The company had a record quarter. Things are," he gestured vaguely at the room around him, "things are going exactly where I wanted them to go." "That's great." "What about you?" He shifted his weight, and she recognized the posture. It was the one he used when he was about to say something he'd already rehearsed. "I heard you went back to Chicago for a while. After everything." "After everything." "For a while," she said. "And now you're, what, consulting again?" "I run my own firm now. We do structural design and project management. We're looking at 2 major contracts in the region this year." Something flickered across his face. Not quite surprise, he was too controlled for surprise, but an adjustment, a recalibration. "That's good," he said. "Good for you." It didn't sound like he thought it was particularly good. Soo-yeon appeared at his elbow then, seamless and unhurried, her hand finding his arm with practiced precision. Up close, her face was more guarded than it had looked from across the room. She looked at Amara with an expression that was professionally pleasant and completely blank. "This is Amara Bennett," Ethan said. "We knew each other a long time ago. Amara, my fiancée, Soo-yeon." My fiancée. Not my wife, which meant they still hadn't married, 3 years in, which was its own kind of information. "Nice to meet you," Amara said. "Likewise." Soo-yeon's English was fluent and careful. Her eyes moved over Amara's dress with an assessment that lasted half a second and reached some conclusion she kept entirely to herself. The 3 of them stood in the particular silence of people who have nothing left to pretend about. Then Ethan said it. "It must be difficult," he said, "coming to something like this alone. These events, they're really designed for," he smiled, "for couples, for people who are established. It can feel a little isolating when you're by yourself." The words landed with the precision he'd intended. He wasn't asking her anything. He was telling the people near them something. The cluster of guests who had drifted close enough to catch the conversation, and there were 4 or 5 of them, definitely within range, definitely listening. They were the real audience for this. Amara looked at him for a moment without speaking. She had spent some portion of the last 3 years preparing, in the abstract way you prepared for things you hoped wouldn't happen, for exactly this kind of moment. She had imagined different versions of it. In some of them, she said something devastating. In some of them, she walked away without a word. In the version she'd played out most often, she simply didn't react, gave him nothing, made his cruelty land in empty air. What she hadn't imagined was this, the absolute, settled quiet inside her chest. It wasn't detachment. It wasn't numbness. It was something much closer to certainty. "I'm comfortable with my own company," she said. "I always have been." Ethan's smile didn't waver. "Of course. I just meant, at your age, after everything you've been through, it seems like it would be—" "Ethan?" Her voice was level. "You don't actually know anything about what I've been through." A small silence. Suyeon's hand tightened very slightly on Ethan's arm, a signal he either didn't receive or chose to ignore. "I'm not trying to be unkind," he said. "I'm genuinely asking, are you seeing someone? Are you happy?" He wanted her to say no. She understood that with complete clarity. He needed her to say no, needed her to be a person whose life had not recovered from his exit from it, because that was the version of the story that made his choices feel justified rather than simply cruel. She was about to answer when her phone vibrated against her palm. She'd been holding it at her side, screen dark. She looked down at the notification. One message. No name. The contact was stored under a setting that kept it unlabeled on the lock screen, a security measure she'd gotten used to without thinking about it anymore. 2 words. "I'm here." Something moved through her chest. Not quite warmth, not quite relief. Closer to the feeling of a knot releasing that you'd forgotten was there. She looked up at Ethan. "Happy?" she said. "Yes." She excused herself before he could push further, stepped away from the cluster, and moved toward the far end of the room. She didn't look back at him. She didn't need to. Outside the ballroom's tall windows, she could see the front entrance of the hotel, and the arrival happening there. 3 black vehicles, not the rental variety, had pulled up to the entrance. Not ostentatious, the opposite of ostentatious. The kind of vehicles chosen specifically because they communicated importance without needing to announce it. Security personnel were moving, not in the panicked way, but in the organized way that meant this had been coordinated in advance. Inside the ballroom, the change was subtle at first. A ripple. That was the only word for it. A ripple moved through the crowd the way a ripple moved through water. Not because anything had been said or announced, but because enough people had registered something, and that registration spread outward through body language alone. Voices dropped. Conversations paused mid-sentence. The string quartet was still playing, but the music felt somehow less present, like the room had decided there was something more important to listen to. Amara turned to face the main entrance. The doors opened. 3 members of a private security detail entered first, each moving with the measured, unhurried precision of people who had done this in rooms like this, and rooms much more dangerous than this. They didn't clear the path aggressively. They didn't need to. The crowd simply made space, the way crowds made space when they understood, on some instinctive level, that the alternative wasn't really an alternative. Then he walked in. Kang Jun-hyun. He was 41 years old, and he did not look like the version of himself that appeared in the 2 photographs that circulated occasionally in financial press. In photographs, he looked contained, controlled, slightly remote. A powerful man who had learned to give cameras as little as possible. In person, he was something different. In person, he occupied space the way very few people occupied space, not by forcing it, but because the space around him simply reorganized itself in response to his presence. He was wearing a black suit. No pocket square, no jewelry, no embellishment of any kind. He didn't need any of it. His face was composed, unreadable in the way that faces became unreadable after years of learning that expression was information and information was leverage. The room had gone genuinely quiet now. Not the polite quiet of a speech being prepared. The instinctive quiet of 200 people recalibrating simultaneously. Amara watched him cross the room. He didn't look at the businessmen who recognized him and lowered their voices. He didn't acknowledge the executives who straightened almost imperceptibly, the instinct of people who understood that the man walking past them had the ability to alter the shape of their professional lives with a single conversation. He didn't look at any of them. He looked at her. His expression changed. It was not a dramatic change. It was not the kind of change you'd catch if you were watching from across the room and didn't know what you were looking for. It was a loosening. A degree of tension released from around his eyes and jaw, the specific relaxation that only happened when a person reached the place, or the person they'd been trying to get to. He walked directly to her. Behind her, she was dimly aware of Ethan Caldwell going very still. Junhyun stopped in front of her. He looked at her face for a moment. Not a long moment, but the kind that meant something. And then he placed his hand against the small of her back. Not possessive, not performative, just present. "I'm late," he said. His voice was low, meant for her. The meeting ran over. "I know," she said. "It's fine. Are you all right?" She looked at him. "I am now." Something passed between them that wasn't words. He turned slightly then, and for the first time he allowed his gaze to move across the people nearest them. The cluster that included Ethan and Soo-yeon, who had drifted closer without appearing to have moved at all, along with perhaps a dozen other guests who were no longer pretending to look at anything else. His voice, when he spoke, was not raised. He didn't need to raise it. "This is my wife," he said, "Amara Bennett." The words fell into the quiet room and stayed there. Amara felt Ethan's gaze on the side of her face like a physical pressure. She didn't look at him. She was looking at Junhyun, who was looking back at her, and in his face she could read the question he always asked, the one he'd asked the first morning she woke up in his apartment and the morning after every difficult night since, the one that had nothing to do with power or empire or the specific terror his name caused in certain circles. He hadn't asked it yet, but she already knew the answer. She had eaten. She was fine. She was exactly where she wanted to be. Behind her, Ethan Caldwell said nothing at all, and in that silence, something shifted in the room. A collective realization moving through the crowd, slow and irreversible, the way realizations moved when they couldn't be taken back. The woman everyone had spent the evening watching with something between pity and speculation was standing with her hand resting lightly against the arm of the most feared man in Seoul. Not because he had come to rescue her, because he had come for her. There was a difference, and every person in that room who had spent time around genuine power, rather than its imitations, understood exactly what that difference meant. Ethan understood it too. She could feel it without looking at him. And somewhere beneath the settled quiet in her chest, beneath the certainty she had been carrying for months now, Amara felt something else, a cold, careful awareness of what would happen next, not tonight, but soon. Because Junhyun had arrived, and when Junhyun arrived somewhere, things changed. She just didn't yet know how many things. The first thing Ethan did was laugh. It was a short sound, involuntary, the kind that escaped before the brain caught up with the situation. And he killed it fast, pressed his lips together, and reset his expression into something more controlled, but the damage was already done. 3 people nearest him had heard it. One of them, a senior partner at a Hong Kong investment group, whose name appeared on buildings, turned to look at Ethan with the specific blankness of someone filing information away for later use. Soo-yeon's hand dropped from Ethan's arm. She didn't move away from him. She simply stopped touching him, and that small withdrawal was somehow louder than anything that had been said in the last 5 minutes. Junhyun did not look at Ethan. That was the thing that Amara noticed most. Not the room's reaction, not Soo-yeon's recalibration, not the way the nearest cluster of guests had rearranged itself with the unconscious choreography of people trying to get a better angle without appearing to try. She noticed that Junhyun had not glanced in Ethan's direction once. Not when he walked in, not when he spoke. He behaved as though Ethan Caldwell did not exist in this room, and in doing so communicated something more devastating than any direct acknowledgement could have managed. He was irrelevant, not as an insult, simply as a fact. A waiter approached and Junhyun took 2 glasses. Water for Amara because he knew she didn't drink at events like this, something clear for himself. And he handed hers over with the easy precision of someone who had learned her habits and stopped thinking of them as information and started thinking of them as just the way things were. Was it bad? he asked. His voice was still low, still only for her. Define bad. You're holding your left hand against your side. She looked down. She was, in fact, pressing her left palm flat against the fabric of her dress, a thing she did when she was working to keep her expression from showing something she didn't want seen. She hadn't realized she was doing it. She released her hand deliberately. I managed. I know you did. He wasn't reassuring her. He was stating it. I'm asking if it cost you anything. She considered the question seriously, the way he'd learned she always considered questions that other people would have deflected. Less than I thought it would, she said finally. He nodded once. Behind them, the room was beginning to find its rhythm again. Conversations restarting, the string quartet coming back into focus, the specific social machinery of 200 people redistributing their attention to whatever came next. But the machinery was running differently than it had been 20 minutes ago, and everyone in the room felt it, even if they couldn't have articulated what had changed. What had changed was this. The geometry of the room had shifted, and Ethan Caldwell was now standing on the wrong side of it. He felt it. Amara knew he felt it because she'd spent 8 months learning to read the tension in his shoulders, and from the peripheral edge of her vision, she could see him standing with his shoulders pulled slightly back. Not relaxed back, forced back, the posture of a man trying to look unaffected while his chest tightened. Soo Yeon said something to him, short, quiet, Korean. He answered in English, which meant he was rattled. When Ethan was rattled, he defaulted to his first language without noticing. I'm fine. You're not fine, she said, still in Korean, switching back without making a production of it. Stop looking at them. I'm not looking at them. Then stop not looking at them so visibly. He turned away from the direction of Amara and Junhyun, which required a physical deliberateness that anyone watching could have identified. He picked up his champagne and drank more of it than he intended to. Across the room, a man named Chairman Woo Il-seung began moving in the direction of Kang Junhyun. Woo Il-seung was 73 years old, Korean-American, and had spent the last 4 decades constructing a financial reputation that operated somewhere in the space between legitimate enterprise and things that were not discussed in conference rooms. He was one of 3 men in Seoul whose opinion of Junhyun functioned less as social observation and more as a form of ongoing institutional assessment. When Chairman Woo moved toward you at an event like this, it meant something specific, and everyone who saw him moving understood what it meant. He reached Junhyun, and the 2 men exchanged the brief, undemonstrative greeting of people who didn't need formality to signal respect. I didn't know you were attending, Woo said. Late decision. Yes. The old man's eyes moved to Amara, and he inclined his head. Mrs. Kang. It was the first time anyone had used that form of address tonight. The sound of it did something unexpected to Amara's sternum. Not discomfort, the opposite. A settling. Chairman Woo, she said, your husband tells me you're working in structural consultation, the Incheon project. Among others. Good work. He said it with the economy of someone who didn't distribute the words carelessly. Your assessment on the northern load-bearing modifications. It was sound, very sound. He moved on before she could respond, which was his way, delivering a verdict and then withdrawing, not waiting for the reaction. Junhyun watched him go with an expression that didn't change. You briefed him on my project assessment? Amara said. He asked about you, I answered. Junhyun. He would have found out through other channels. This was faster and more accurate. He glanced at her sideways. Was that the wrong call? She thought about it. With another man, she would have found it presumptuous. With him, she understood the architecture of how his mind worked, the constant low-level management of information, of who knew what and when, the way he treated accuracy as a form of respect rather than interference. No, she said. It wasn't the wrong call. The evening progressed. Amara worked the room the way she had come to work rooms in the last year, with Junhyun present but not adjacent, close enough that his proximity communicated what it needed to communicate without turning her into an accessory. He understood, without her having to explain it, that she needed to be seen operating on her own terms. He gave her that. He had always given her that. She had 3 substantive conversations in the next hour. The Singaporean architect Daniel Lim, whom she returned to and finished the discussion she'd been pulled away from. A Japanese infrastructure director named Tanaka, whose company was involved in 3 of the same regional projects she was targeting, and a woman named Grace Kim, who ran a mid-sized Korean development firm and who shook Amara's hand with the grip of someone who had spent years proving she deserved to be in rooms like this and hadn't stopped proving it yet. The conversations were good, real, the kind that moved things forward. She was in the middle of the last one when she registered Ethan approaching again from her left. She registered it the way she registered most things now, sit calmly, with enough time to decide how to respond before he arrived. She finished her sentence to Grace Kim, exchanged cards, and turned as Ethan reached her. He'd had more champagne, not enough to show in his posture. He was too practiced for that, but enough to have moved him past the place where he was going to let the evening end the way the evening had been going. "Can I talk to you?" he said. "Privately." Grace Kim looked between them with the practiced neutrality of a woman who had learned to recognize male entitlement at 40 paces and had stopped inserting herself into its path. "I was in the middle of something," Amara said. "I know, 5 minutes." Grace Kim excused herself smoothly. Amara noted the departure and filed a small frustration away. 5 minutes, she said. They moved to a quieter section near the east wall, an alcove partially screened by an arrangement of tall orchids. Ethan turned to face her, and for a moment he just looked at her, and she saw something in his face that was less calculation than she'd expected. Something raw, something she didn't entirely have a name for. "When did that happen?" he said. "That's what you want to talk about." "Yes." "When?" 14 months ago. He absorbed that. 14 months. He repeated it not like a question, but like he was testing the weight of it. How long were we together before we got married?" "Yes, long enough." He shook his head. The rawness in his face was clarifying into something else. Not anger, not quite. Something more corrosive. Amara, do you understand who that man is? What he actually does? The things that are attached to his name? Better than you do. I'm not sure you... Ethan. Her voice was flat. Don't. I'm serious. I know what you know about him, she said. I know what everyone in this room thinks they know about him. And I'm telling you that the version of the story you're working from is incomplete. So before you stand here and position yourself as someone protecting me from something, consider that I don't need that from you. I haven't needed anything from you in 3 years. And whatever concern you think you're feeling right now, she paused. Look at what it's actually attached to. He went still. You're not worried about me, she said. You're worried about what it means about you. That I'm fine. That I built something. That the story you told yourself about how you left because I wasn't enough, because there wasn't enough future in it, because you were being smart and forward-thinking and practical. That story requires me to have lost something. And I didn't lose anything, Ethan. I just moved somewhere you couldn't follow. The muscles in his jaw tightened. That's not, he started. It's exactly what it is. A long silence. The noise of the party moved around them like water around a still point. He's going to get you hurt, Ethan said finally. His voice had changed. The champagne edge was gone, replaced by something that was maybe, underneath all the other things it was, a fractured remnant of the person he'd been before he decided that warmth was a liability. That world, the things he does, you think it doesn't come back around? You think being his wife insulates you from that? I think, she said carefully, that you should go back to your fiancé. He didn't move. Ethan, I made a mistake, he said. The words fell into the space between them, and she looked at them. At the shape of them, the lateness of them, the specific way they landed, which was not like an apology and was not like a confession, but was something more like a man removing a piece of armor he'd been wearing so long he'd forgotten it was armor. She felt nothing sharp, no satisfaction, no grief, nothing with edges, just a kind of tired clarity. Yes, she said. You did. She walked back into the party. She found Junhyun near the center of the room, standing with Chairman Woo and two other men she recognized from the financial press. He saw her coming, and the conversation he was in didn't pause. He didn't break away or signal anything. But something in the set of his shoulders changed, a minute adjustment that told her he'd clocked her return and her state and found both acceptable. She took a position beside him without inserting herself into the conversation. And one of the other men, a tall Korean named Park Sung-jin, who ran a construction conglomerate, shifted to include her without making it an accommodation. The evening began to wind down around 11. The guests moved toward departure with the graduated reluctance of people who understood that the real conversations at events like this happen in the last 20 minutes, in the specific fluidity of a room that was no longer performing for itself. Amara was saying goodbye to Tanaka from the infrastructure firm when she noticed Soo Yeon moving toward her. Not Ethan, Soo Yeon. She finished the goodbye, watched Tanaka move toward the coat check, and turned to face the woman who had taken the life that had once, in a version of reality that felt very far away, been adjacent to her own. Soo Yeon stopped at a distance that was polite but not warm. She was carrying her evening bag in both hands, a detail Amara noticed because it was the same thing she herself did when she was keeping her hands occupied to prevent the rest of her from showing something. "I want to apologize," Soo Yeon said. Amara waited. "For tonight, for the way he spoke to you earlier, I should have—" She paused, pressed her lips together. "I should have said something then. Why didn't you?" The question landed without softening, and Soo Yeon absorbed it. "Because I didn't want to have the argument it would have caused, in public." She met Amara's eyes. "That's the honest answer." "I appreciate the honest answer." Soo Yeon nodded. She looked tired in the way people look tired when the performance of the evening had used up everything they'd budgeted and gone past it. "You were right earlier," she said. "What you said to him, about why he came over to you." She said it not like a wound, but like a piece of information she'd finished processing. "I've known that about him for a while. I just keep hoping the version of him that I married is the real one." Amara looked at her for a moment. "Which version did you marry?" Soo Yeon's mouth pulled at one corner. Not quite a smile. "The one he decided to be when it was useful." There was nothing to say to that wouldn't be either cruel or dishonest, so Amara said neither. She nodded once, and Soo Yeon nodded back, and the two women separated in the way of people who have reached the outer edge of what they are able to offer each other. Junhyun's car was waiting. Amara settled into the back seat, and the city moved past the windows. The particular version of Seoul at 11:30 on a weeknight, the lights broken and reassembled by the tinted glass, the streets still moving with the specific energy of a city that never fully surrendered to sleep. Junhyun sat beside her, not touching her, just present. "How was it?" he said. "Productive. 3 real conversations. Tanaka is going to call my office Monday." "And the rest of it?" She looked at the window. "He told me he made a mistake." Junhyun didn't say anything. "He came to find me when you were across the room," she said. "He wanted to— I don't know what he wanted, to warn me about you, to tell me he was wrong. Both, maybe." She was quiet for a moment. "It didn't make me feel anything I expected it to make me feel." "What did it make you feel?" She thought about Soo Yeon's face, the tired, careful honesty of a woman who had married a useful version of a man and was beginning to understand the cost of that. "Tired," she said. "Just tired." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the city continued its particular version of existing. "He's been removed from the Hansol Project Steering Committee," Junhyun said. She turned to look at him. His face was even. Not guilty. Not defensive. Just stating a fact the way he stated facts, as though the information existed independent of any decision he'd made about it, which was, she had learned, how he communicated about things he had decided without wanting to open them for debate. "When?" she said. 2 weeks ago. Before tonight. Before I knew he'd be there." "Why?" "There were irregularities in the procurement reporting from Q2. His signature was on 3 approvals that shouldn't have been approved." He met her eyes. "It was already being reviewed. Tonight had nothing to do with it." She looked at him for a long moment. She believed him. Not because she was naive about what he was capable of, not because she had decided to trust him in the simple, uncomplicated way that people meant when they talked about trust. She believed him because she had spent 14 months learning to read the difference between the truth and the managed version of the truth, and this was the truth. "He doesn't know yet," she said. "He'll be notified Monday." She turned back to the window. Ethan, at this moment, was probably in another car with Soo-yeon, replaying the evening in the way that people replayed evenings that hadn't gone the way they planned. He was probably recalibrating, finding the version of the story that let him feel like he still had a position on the board. He didn't know that the board was already being cleared. "Jun-hyun," she said. "Yes." "The procurement irregularities." She kept her voice even. "Were they real?" The car moved through an intersection. The light turned from green to red behind them. He looked at her. The city lights moved across his face in intervals. "Yes," he said. "They were real." She nodded. She believed that too, but something had tightened in her chest. Not suspicion, not the acid of doubt, but a quieter thing. An awareness. A recognition that the world she was living in now operated with a completeness of information she would never have full access to, and that the man beside her was always 3 moves ahead of the current conversation. She had known this when she married him. She had decided it was something she could live with. She was still deciding. The car pulled up to the private entrance of the residential tower, and the security team outside the vehicle ran the standard check before the door opened. The same routine as every night, the same series of small practiced gestures that had become ordinary in a way that should have been strange and wasn't anymore. She was almost out of the car when her phone vibrated. Unknown number. Seoul area code but no name. She looked at it. She almost let it go to voicemail. Then something. Instinct. The same instinct that had kept her alive in rooms she shouldn't have survived socially, that had told her when to stay and when to leave and when to hold very still, told her to answer. She did. The voice on the other end was male, Korean accented English, and extremely controlled. "Mrs. Kang," the voice said, "my name isn't important. What's important is that you understand what was decided about your husband tonight, at the table you weren't invited to, by the people who have been patient long enough." Her hand tightened on the phone. "I don't know who you are," she said. "No," the voice agreed, "but in 48 hours you're going to wish you had asked that question earlier." The line went dead. She stood on the sidewalk outside the tower with the dead phone in her hand, and the night air moving against her face, and she understood, with the precise and terrible clarity of someone who had just stepped from solid ground into something that had no bottom she could see, that whatever she had believed about the world she'd entered when she married Kang Jun-hyun, whatever careful, manageable version of it she had been living inside, was about to be stripped away. She didn't tell him about the call that night. She told herself it was because she needed time to think, needed to understand what she was dealing with before she handed it to someone who would immediately move to contain it. And Jun-hyun would move to contain it. That was simply who he was. The reflex was so deep, it had become indistinguishable from breathing. She told herself she was being strategic, that waiting 24 hours to gather information was rational. She knew, somewhere beneath the rationalization, that it was also fear. Not fear of the voice on the phone. Fear of what Jun-hyun's response to the voice on the phone would reveal about the architecture of the world she was actually living inside. So she went upstairs. She went through the motions of the end of the evening. She listened to him talk briefly about the Woo meeting, about a logistics problem in the Busan operation that his deputy was handling, about the weather forecast for the weekend, which called for rain. She said the right things. She was present in all the ways that didn't require her to be honest about the phone call, and she was good at it. She had always been good at managing the surface of herself when the interior was doing something complicated. She lay awake for 3 hours. By the time the city outside had gone as quiet as Seoul ever went, she had made a decision. She was going to find out who the voice belonged to before she said anything to Jun-hyun. Not because she didn't trust him, because she needed to understand the threat on her own terms before someone else defined it for her. She had one contact who existed in the overlap between her professional world and the edges of Jun-hyun's, a woman named Min Ji-yeon, 47, former investigative journalist, currently operating something that was classified officially as a private research consultancy and unofficially as a very precise and very expensive information brokerage. Amara had met her through a project due diligence process 8 months ago. They had dinner twice since then. Min Ji-yeon was one of the few people in Seoul who spoke to Amara as a person entirely independent of who she was married to. She texted her at 6 in the morning. 4 words. I need your help. The response came back in 11 minutes. When and where? They met at a cafe in Mapogu at 8, a place small enough that the ambient noise made private conversation possible. Min Ji-yeon was already there when Amara arrived, dressed plainly, no makeup, a tablet open in front of her that she closed without ceremony when Amara sat down. Amara played the voicemail recording she'd made by calling her own number from the unknown phone immediately after the line went dead, an instinct she was grateful for now. Min Ji-yeon listened to it twice with the same expression throughout, which was no expression at all. 48 hours was last night, Amara said. That's 18 hours from now. Min Ji-yeon set the phone down on the table between them. How many people know about this call? You and me. Not your husband. Not yet. Min Ji-yeon looked at her with the particular steadiness of someone who had spent 2 decades in rooms where things were not what they appeared to be and had learned to see clearly without reacting to what she saw. The number is a relay, she said. Whoever made this call used a routing service. I can find the origin point, but it takes time. 6 hours minimum, probably longer. Do you recognize the voice? No, but the phrasing, she tapped the edge of the tablet, the table you weren't invited to. That's not a threat from someone external. That's someone who sits at the table, or used to. Amara had reached the same conclusion at 2 in the morning staring at the ceiling. Someone inside his organization, or adjacent to it. The people who operate at Kang Jun-hyun's level don't have external enemies who call the wife directly. The external enemies use different methods. She paused. This is personal. Someone is sending you a message specifically because you are the message. Amara looked at her coffee. They wanted me to tell him. Or they wanted to see if you would. Min Ji-yeon folded her hands on the table. Either way, you became a variable last night. When he walked into that gala and announced your marriage in front of 200 people, that changed something. Before last night, most of the people who matter in that world knew he was married, but the specifics were controlled. Last night made you visible. And visible means targetable. In that world, yes. Amara sat with this for a moment. The cafe around them moved at its ordinary morning pace. Espresso machines, low conversation, someone at the counter arguing gently with the barista about an order. The ordinary texture of a city that had no idea what was being discussed at this particular table. Find the number, she said, whatever it costs. Min Ji-yeon nodded and picked her tablet back up. I'll call you when I have something. Amara was back at the apartment by 9:30. Jun-hyun had already left for the office. He kept early hours, always had, the kind of schedule that started before the city fully woke and ended well after it had settled in for the night. She had the apartment to herself, which was what she needed. She sat at the desk in the room she used for her own work, and she pulled up everything she could access through professional and public channels about the internal structure of Jun-hyun's organization, not the criminal architecture, which she had only partial knowledge of and had chosen to keep it that way, but the business layer, the legitimate empire that sat on top of the other one, vast and intricate, the thing that made all the rest of it legally defensible. There were 7 names at the senior executive level. She knew 4 of them by face and name from dinners and events over the last year. The other 3 she had been introduced to once each and had not seen since, which in the context of Jun-hyun's world she now recognized as possibly meaningful. She was making notes when her phone rang. Not Min Ji-yeon, a number she recognized, her project manager in Chicago, a man named David Osei, who had been with her firm since the beginning and who did not call on weekday mornings unless something had gone wrong. David, I need you to look at something. His voice had the quality of a person working very hard to stay in front of their own panic. I'm sending you an email right now. Open it before I explain. She opened it. The email was from a regulatory compliance address she didn't recognize, a subsidiary body of the Korean Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, and Transport. It was addressed to her firm. The subject line was a formal notice number, and the body of the document, dense with official language, contained an allegation that 3 of her firm's project assessments over the past 8 months contained falsified safety data, and that as a result, all active contracts affiliated with her consultancy were being placed under immediate investigative hold pending review. She read it twice. Her hands were flat on the desk. "Amara," David said, "this can't be real." "When did this arrive?" 20 minutes ago. I also got calls this morning. 2 of the contractors we're working with on the Incheon project said they received notice that our certification is under review. They're asking us to, but I heard you. Give me an hour." She hung up. She sat very still and looked at the document on her screen, and she understood, with the cold, dropping clarity of someone watching a structure they built with their own hands begin to fail, exactly what was happening. The 48 hours. This was it. Not a physical threat. Not something directed at Junhyun. Something directed at her, at the thing she had built that was entirely her own, the work that existed before him and independent of him, and that she had protected with a fierceness she hadn't even fully articulated to herself until this moment when it was being taken apart. She called Min Ji-yeon back. "I know what it is," she said when Min Ji-yeon picked up. "It's not just the phone call. They filed a false regulatory complaint against my firm." A beat of silence. "When?" "This morning. Probably went in last night after the gala." "Coordinated," Min Ji-yeon said. "The call was the warning shot. This is the actual weapon." "Can the complaint be traced back to whoever filed it?" "In theory. In practice, these things are structured to be anonymous at the point of origin. It would take weeks to establish the source through official channels, and by that time my contracts are suspended and my firm's credibility is destroyed," Amara said. "Yes, I understand the timeline." Silence on the line. Then Min Ji-yeon said carefully, "You need to tell him." "I know." "Amara, this is beyond what I can address through my channels. This is someone using institutional infrastructure as a weapon. That requires—" "I know what it requires." She pressed her fingers against her forehead. "Give me until this afternoon." She needed to understand one more thing before she had that conversation. She needed to know why, not who. She would find out who when the trace completed. But the why was something she could work out herself if she thought clearly, and she needed to think clearly before she walked into Junhyun's office and placed this in his hands. Because once she did that, once she gave it to him, the way it was handled would no longer be under her control. She spent an hour going back through the gala guest list, which she'd photographed from the printed program at check-in out of professional habit. She cross-referenced it against the 7 senior names in Junhyun's business structure. 3 of them had been at the gala. 2 of them she'd spoken to, Park Sung-jin and a man named Lee Dae-kwon, both of whom had been cordial, had treated her as exactly what she was. The 3rd was a name she'd seen on the program but hadn't encountered during the evening, Kim Byung-soo, Executive Vice President, Kang Group Holdings, responsible for strategic compliance and regulatory affairs. Regulatory affairs. She looked at the name for a long time. She went back to the photograph of the program. Kim Byung-soo had been listed as attending. She had not seen him in the room, but she hadn't been looking for him, hadn't known to look. She called Min Ji-yeon again. "Kim Byung-soo, EVP at Kang Group. Tell me what you know." Another pause, longer this time. When Min Ji-yeon spoke, her voice had changed, had taken on the careful quality of someone choosing every word with precision. "Where did that name come from?" "The gala program. He was there last night." "He was?" A breath. "Amara, Kim Byung-soo has been with the Kang Group for 11 years. He was the 2nd most senior person in the organization before your husband married you. He ran regulatory strategy, which means he had personal relationships with every compliance body that could affect the group's operations." Amara's chest was very still. "And after we married?" "He was moved laterally. Officially, it was described as a restructuring. He lost direct access to 3 key regulatory relationships. Those relationships were reassigned to a deputy who reports directly to your husband." "Why?" "Because your husband decided he was a liability." Min Ji-yeon's voice was steady and flat. There were concerns. This was before your marriage, about 18 months ago, about Kim's loyalty to the organization versus his loyalty to a specific faction inside it. Your husband moved him sideways. Kim accepted it, or appeared to. Amara stood up from the desk and walked to the window. Seoul spread out below her in the sharp morning light, enormous and indifferent. The city going about its 10 million lives with no awareness of the particular small catastrophe being assembled and detonated in this apartment. He used my firm, she said. He went after my work because it's the one thing that's entirely mine, not Junhyun's. Mine. He knew that hitting it would... She stopped. Force your husband's hand, Min Ji-yeon said. Yes. This isn't about destroying your business, though that's a consequence he'd accept. This is about making Kang Junhyun respond publicly and personally to a threat against his wife, pulling him into a conflict on Kim's terms in an arena Kim controls. Amara turned away from the window. Where is the phone trace, she said. I have a partial. The relay routes through a private server in Incheon. The registration trace leads to a shell company. A pause. The shell company lists one director. The director's name is a proxy, but the address of registration... Min Ji-yeon stopped. What? The address of registration is the same building as Kim Byung-soo's private investment vehicle. Different floor, different suite, different registered name, but the same building. A beat. That's not proof, but it's not nothing. It was enough. Amara picked up her bag, her phone, her keys. She was out the door in 40 seconds. The Kong Group headquarters occupied the top 12 floors of a glass tower in Jung-gu. Amara had been inside the building 4 times. She knew the security desk staff by name because Junhyun had introduced her personally, a deliberate act, she understood now, of establishing her status in an environment where status was the primary currency. The woman at the desk, a young Korean named Hana, looked up when Amara came through the entrance. Mrs. Kang, he's in a meeting. I know, Amara said. Tell him I'm here. The meeting, as it turned out, was with Kim Byung-soo. She found this out not from Hana, who was already on the phone, but from the man himself, who appeared at the elevator bank 30 seconds after she entered the lobby, stepping out with his jacket buttoned, his face perfectly composed, a tablet under his arm. He was 54, compact, with the kind of stillness that came not from calm but from enormous practiced control over a nature that was not calm at all. He looked at Amara with an expression that was professionally pleasant and completely opaque. Mrs. Kang, he said, I didn't know you were coming in. No, she said. You didn't. He held her gaze for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt, not quite. Something more calculated. He was assessing what she knew, measuring the distance between what she'd figured out and what she could prove. Is there something I can help you with? He said. No, she said again. But thank you. The elevator opened. She stepped inside. The doors closed on Kim Byung-soo's face, and in the last second before they shut, she saw it. The calculation resolve into something colder, the professional pleasantness dropping away like a mask that had served its purpose. He knew she knew, which meant the 48 hours he'd given her were already over. Junhyun's office occupied the northeast corner of the 43rd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides, a view of the city that on clear days extended to the Han River. He was standing when she walked in, phone to his ear, and the moment he saw her face, he ended the call without finishing the sentence. He looked at her the way he looked at her when he was already calculating, reading the information her face was giving him before she spoke. Sit down, he said. I'd rather stand. Amara. I got a phone call last night, she said. After the gala, unknown number. I didn't tell you because I needed to understand it first. She watched his face. I'm telling you now. She told him everything. The call, the regulatory complaint against her firm, Min Ji-yeon's trace, the shell company address. Kim Byung-soo in the lobby 30 seconds ago. He stood completely still throughout. He did not interrupt. His face gave her nothing. Not anger, not surprise, not the particular coldness that she had learned preceded a decision already made. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The meeting I just came from, he said. Yes. He was presenting a restructuring proposal for the Regulatory Affairs Division. His voice was even. He wanted direct control restored over the 3 compliance relationships. He's been planning this. Yes. For how long? He looked at her steadily. Long enough. She felt the anger arrive then. Not at him, not exactly, but at the situation, at the particular way this world worked, at the fact that her firm, her work, the things she had built with her own competence over years of grinding effort, had been used as a chess piece by a man who saw her not as a person, but as a leverage point. Can you stop the regulatory complaint? She said. Yes. Without it looking like interference. He was quiet for a half second. That's more complicated. I need it stopped without it looking like you intervened on my behalf, she said. Because if it looks like that, every piece of work I've done in this region gets recontextualized. Every contract, every assessment, every professional relationship. It all becomes about who I'm married to instead of what I actually did. I need it cleaned up on its own merits. He looked at her for a long time. The filing is fraudulent, she said. The safety data in my assessments is accurate. I can prove that independently. I have the original source documentation, the third-party engineering reviews, the site records. If the investigation proceeds through normal channels, I win. But normal channels take months, and by then the damage to your firm's reputation in the region is already done, he said. Yes. He turned to the window. The city sat below them, enormous and complicated and full of the particular kind of trouble that came from people with power deciding that other people's lives were acceptable collateral in their private wars. Kim, he said. Not a question. The address matches. He was quiet for a moment. He's been with this organization for 11 years. I know. He built the regulatory framework that has kept this company protected through 3 separate government transitions. His voice was completely flat. And he used it to come after you. She watched him from across the room. His back was still to her. His hands were at his sides. Junhyun, she said, what are you going to do? He turned around. His face had changed. The husband was gone. What looked back at her from across the room was the other version of him. The one that had built an empire in a world that ate the uncertain and the hesitant. The one that had made his name mean something specific in rooms full of men who measured each other in the currency of what they were willing to do. I'm going to finish a conversation I should have finished 18 months ago, he said, and my firm. Your firm will be protected, on its own merits, through a channel that has no visible connection to me or to this organization. He held her eyes. But I need you to trust me on the method. She looked at him, at the man she had married with full knowledge of what that meant, and had spent 14 months learning the dimensions of. Show me the channel first, she said. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise. Something closer to a recognition, a seeing of her that was complete and without the soft edges of projection. All right, he said. He walked to his desk and opened his laptop, and she came around to stand beside him and look at the screen. And in that moment, standing shoulder to shoulder in a room 43 floors above a city that was, in various ways, both of theirs, she understood that whatever was coming next was going to require her to become something she hadn't entirely been before. Not harder. She was already hard in the ways that mattered. Something else. Something that could stand inside the full reality of this world and not flinch from what it saw, and still find a way to remain herself. She looked at the screen. She read what he showed her, and she understood with cold and absolute clarity that there was no version of what came next that left her unchanged. The channel he showed her was a name, one name, on a document that had no letterhead, no official designation, no institutional markings of any kind. A single line of text on a white background. Park Hyun-suk, Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport, Division of Professional Standards Review. She's the one who received the complaint, Junhyun said, and she's the one who decides whether it moves forward to formal investigation or gets returned for insufficient evidence. You know her. She was a structural engineer before she moved into regulatory work. 15 years of field experience. She does not process complaints she considers frivolous, and she does not respond well to pressure from people she considers beneath her professional standards. He paused. She will respond to evidence. Yours, presented directly, without intermediary. Amara looked at the name on the screen. You're not going to call her? No. You're not going to have anyone call her? No. I go to her directly, on my own. With your documentation, he said, your source records, your third-party engineering reviews, the site data, all of it assembled and presented by you as the professional whose work is being questioned. He straightened. That is the channel. You win this on your own record. She understood what he was giving her, not protection. The other thing, the harder thing, the chance to stand in the ring herself and take the shot back on her own terms. She also understood what it cost him to offer it, instead of simply making the problem disappear, which was what he was capable of doing, and what every instinct he had was probably telling him to do. All right, she said. She spent the rest of that day in the apartment assembling documentation. David Osei sent everything from the Chicago office: original engineering assessments, time-stamped source files, third-party review certificates, site inspection records with independent verification signatures. She organized it with the systematic precision of someone who had spent years learning that in professional disputes, the person who controlled the presentation of evidence controlled the narrative. She did not sleep much that night either. She also did not think about Kim Byung-soo. She thought about him the next morning when Jun Hyun left earlier than usual, which was information, and she realized that whatever conversation he'd said he needed to finish was happening now, in whatever room and whatever register that kind of conversation happened in, and she had no visibility into it, and she had made the decision 14 months ago that she would not ask for visibility into things that existed on the other side of the line she'd drawn. She kept her focus on what was in front of her. Park Hyun-suk's office was in a government building in Gwanghwamun, 7th floor, a corner room that smelled like old paper and industrial cleaning fluid. The woman herself was 61, small, with close-cropped hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the particular economy of movement that came from decades of not wasting energy on anything unnecessary. She looked at Amara's documentation for 40 minutes without speaking. Amara sat across the desk and did not fill the silence. Finally, Park Hyun-suk set down the last page and looked across the desk with the expression of someone who had just finished running calculations and arrived at a result that didn't surprise her but confirmed something she'd already suspected. The load analysis on the Incheon North section, she said. You ran a secondary verification after the initial assessment. Standard practice for structures in that soil classification, Amara said. The primary assessment was clean, but the subsurface variance warranted a second pass. Most consultancies skip the second pass. It adds cost. I don't skip it. Park Hyun-suk looked at her for a long moment, not evaluating the documentation anymore, evaluating Amara. The complaint alleges falsification on 3 separate assessments. I've now reviewed 2 of the 3 in detail. She removed her glasses from her forehead and set them on the desk. The third is the Mapo Bridge Reinforcement Project. I have the complete file. I know, I've read it. She folded her hands. Mrs. Kang, I'm going to tell you something that doesn't leave this room. Amara waited. This complaint was filed through a channel that bypasses the standard intake process. It came in through a direct submission pathway that requires a senior authorization code. That code belongs to a specific category of internal user. She paused. I'm not going to tell you whose code was used. I'm going to tell you that as of this morning, I've referred the question of that code's use to our internal oversight office, because filing a fraudulent complaint using an authorization code is a significantly more serious matter than whatever the complaint itself alleges. Something loosened in Amara's chest. Not relief, not yet. Something more careful than relief. What happens to my firm's contracts, she said. The investigative hold will be lifted within 24 hours. I'll send formal written confirmation to the contractors who received notice. Park Hyun-suk picked up her glasses again, a signal that the conversation was approaching its end. Your assessments are sound, better than sound. I've reviewed a lot of work in this office, and I know the difference between someone doing the minimum and someone who actually cares whether the structures they certify stay standing. Amara stood. Thank you. Don't thank me, the older woman said, already looking back at the papers on her desk. Do the second pass, every time. She was in the elevator going down when her phone vibrated. David Osei. The Incheon contractor just called. They said the hold notice has been withdrawn. Amara, what happened? She typed back, I'll explain this afternoon. We're fine. She stood in the lobby of the government building for a moment, the morning foot traffic moving around her, and she allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of something that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite triumph, but lived in the space between them. The specific feeling of having taken a hit aimed at what you'd built and not gone down. Then she put her phone away and walked outside. The message from Jun Hyun came an hour later while she was in a taxi back to Gangnam. Come to the office. Now. No explanation. The brevity itself was information. He only stripped language down to that degree when something had moved faster than expected and the margins had narrowed. She told the driver to change direction. The lobby of the Kang Group Tower was different when she walked in this time. The difference was subtle. The security desk staff were present and professional as always. The elevators were operating normally. But there were 2 additional men in the lobby she hadn't seen before, positioned with the specific casualness of people who were not being casual, and Hana at the front desk looked up when Amara entered with an expression that was professionally composed over something that was not composed at all. He's expecting you, Hana said. 43rd floor. Go straight up. Amara went straight up. The elevator opened onto the executive floor and she registered immediately that the normal midday activity of the floor, assistants moving between offices, the low ambient sound of phones and conversation, had a different quality. Quieter. More deliberate. The kind of quiet that settled over a space when people understood that something significant was happening and had made the collective decision to be very careful. She walked to Jun Hyun's office. There were voices inside. She could hear them through the closed door. Not the words, but the register. One voice controlled. One voice not controlled. She opened the door. Jun Hyun was standing behind his desk. Beside him stood his chief of operations, a man named Seo Min-jun, 45, whom Amara had met 3 times, and who had always treated her with the respectful neutrality of someone following his employer's lead. He was standing very still. Across the desk, Kim Byung-soo was standing also. He had not been invited to sit. His composure from the lobby yesterday was gone. Not entirely. He was still a controlled man, fundamentally. Still the version of himself that had survived 11 years in an organization that did not carry people who couldn't maintain themselves under pressure. But the edges were showing. His jacket was still buttoned, but his tie had been loosened. A small deviation that in this context registered like a shout. He looked at Amara when she walked in. Something crossed his face. Surprise, quickly locked down, and beneath it something uglier. A flash of the calculation that had decided she was an acceptable target, reassessing in real time whether that calculation had been correct. Close the door, Jun Hyun said. She closed it. Sit down, he said. To her, not to Kim. She sat. Kim remained standing, which she understood was not his choice. Tell her what you told me, Jun Hyun said to Kim. His voice was the flattest she had ever heard it. Kim's jaw moved. I don't think that's... Tell her. A silence that had weight in it. Kim looked at Amara. His eyes were doing the thing eyes did when the person behind them was running multiple calculations simultaneously, and none of the results were coming back favorable. The regulatory complaint was a negotiating instrument, he said. It was never intended to result in formal action against your firm. It was intended to force my husband's hand, Amara said. Kim stopped. To pull him into a public response, she said. To put him in the position of either protecting me visibly and compromising the organization's relationship with the regulatory bodies, or not protecting me and creating a different kind of problem. She looked at him steadily. It was elegant. If I hadn't found the shell company connection, it probably would have worked. Something moved across Kim's face that wasn't quite respect and wasn't quite hatred. Something that was both. The shell company, he said. How? It doesn't matter how. It matters to me. I know, she said. That's why I'm not going to tell you. Jun Hyun's eyes moved to her for a half second, and in that half second she read something she hadn't expected to see there. Not approval exactly, something quieter and more specific than approval. Recognition. The full kind, the kind that saw all the way down. He looked back at Kim. You've been with this organization for 11 years, he said. You built systems that this company still depends on. I moved you sideways 18 months ago because I had concerns about where your loyalties were oriented, and I gave you the opportunity to demonstrate that those concerns were wrong. A pause. You did the opposite. What I did, Kim said, and his voice had changed now, the control fraying in a way that was almost a relief after the smoothness, the real thing finally surfacing, was protect an organization that you have been systematically reorienting around a personal relationship. You brought a woman none of us knew into the center of this structure. You announced her publicly, made her visible, created exposure that what? Junhyun's voice was very quiet. That made her a target for the people inside this organization who decided their objections justified using institutional infrastructure as a weapon against her. You used a ministry authorization code that you retained access to through a contact you were explicitly asked to transfer 18 months ago. Junhyun moved from behind the desk, not quickly, the deliberate, unhurried movement of someone who didn't need speed to communicate danger. You retained it specifically because you were planning to need it. That's not a spontaneous decision, Byung-soo. That is a plan, executed over months, against my wife. The room was very still. Kim's breathing had changed. Amara could see it, the chest moving differently, shorter cycles, the body responding to a threat level the brain was still trying to process. What happens now? Kim said. It wasn't quite a question. The ministry's internal oversight office is already reviewing the misuse of the authorization code, Junhyun said. That investigation proceeds independently of anything I do. You understand what that means? Kim understood. The color in his face confirmed it. Your access to this building was revoked at 9 this morning, Junhyun continued. Your position is terminated effective today. The terms of your departure will be handled by legal. He stopped 2 feet from Kim, and something in the atmosphere of the room changed again, shifted into a register that was harder to name. And I want to be very clear about the next part. Not as your former employer, as something else. Kim held very still. If anything, any action, any communication, any further use of any contact or resource connected to you or anyone associated with you, touches my wife's work, her firm, her professional relationships, or her name in any context through any channel, the conversation we have after that will not happen in this office. The silence that followed was the kind that didn't need to be filled. Kim nodded once, a small, precise movement, the nod of a man who understood exactly what had just been said and had decided that he believed it. Seo Min-jun moved to the door and opened it, and Kim Byung-soo walked out of the office of Kang Jun-hyun for the last time. His footsteps even, his back straight, everything in his bearing communicating a dignity that was entirely performance and that Amara suspected would crack the moment he reached the elevator. The door closed. The 3 of them, Amara, Jun-hyun, Seo Min-jun, stood in the office and the air settled back into something breathable. The ministry confirmation, Jun-hyun said to Seo Min-jun. Received. The oversight referral is formal. It'll move through their internal process. And the access systems, completed at 9:12. The legal team, ready to send terms by end of day. Jun-hyun nodded. Seo Min-jun left, pulling the door closed behind him with the quietness of someone who had learned to read the room and understood that what came next was not for him. Amara was still sitting. She hadn't moved since she sat down when he told her to, and she was aware of that suddenly. The stillness of her own body over the last 20 minutes, the control it had required, the specific exhaustion that was beginning to arrive in her hands and shoulders, now that the immediate pressure had lifted enough to let the body register what it had been doing. Jun-hyun sat down across from her, not behind the desk, in the chair beside it, the one used for conversations that weren't meant to have a power axis. He looked at her. The ministry official, he said, Park Hyun-suk. Yes. How did it go? She's referring the code misuse to internal oversight independently. She said the hold would be lifted within 24 hours. Amara met his eyes. She didn't know I was connected to you. I went in as a consulting professional whose work was being questioned. I know, he said. That's exactly what you are. She looked at him for a long moment. I need to ask you something, she said. Yes. Kim, The full scope of what you knew about him 18 months ago when you moved him sideways. She kept her voice even. I need to know if what you knew then, the specific concerns, are things I should know now. Not because I need to approve your decisions, because I need to understand the full shape of what I'm living inside. His face was still for a moment. This was the real question, the one that had been underneath every other question since the phone call in the dark outside the tower 2 nights ago. Not about Kim Byung-soo specifically, about the gap, the distance between what she knew and what she didn't know, and whether that distance was something she could keep living with or whether it had just gotten too wide. He said, there are things in this organization that I have not told you because telling you would make you a legal and physical risk. Not because I don't trust you with the information, because the information itself would change your position in ways I am not willing to change your position. And if I decided I needed to know anyway, then I would tell you. His voice was entirely level, and then we would have to make different decisions about a lot of things. She looked at her hands. The left one had been pressing against her side again, and she hadn't noticed. She released it. I'm not asking you to tell me everything, she said. I'm asking you to tell me when something is about to arrive at my door the way this did. I can handle the information. What I can't handle is being the last person to know about a threat that's coming for the things I've built. That's fair, he said immediately. No hedge, no qualification. That was a failure on my part. I knew Kim's state of mind had been deteriorating. I should have flagged to you that the exposure from the gala changed your risk profile. She looked at him. The word failure in his mouth caused something. She understood that without needing him to explain it. All right, she said. All right, he said back. Outside the window, Seoul was moving through its afternoon in the particular way Seoul moved. Relentless, layered, 10 million intersecting stories running simultaneously with no awareness of each other, each one convinced of its own centrality. The Han River was visible in the distance, light moving on the surface the way light moved on water when it didn't know anyone was watching. Amara's phone vibrated. David Osei again. Incheon contractor called back. The hold is officially lifted. Tanaka's office called too, so they want to schedule Monday. Amara, we're okay. She read it and set the phone face down on her knee. My firm is clear, she said. Good, she nodded. She was very tired. The kind of tired that didn't come from sleeplessness alone, but from the sustained effort of maintaining yourself under pressure that came from multiple directions simultaneously. The professional threat, the personal history of the gala, the phone call, the gap between what she knew and what she didn't, the ongoing work of being the person she was inside a world that required constant navigation. She thought about what Park Hyun-suk had said. Do the second pass. Every time. She thought about the shell company in the same building as Kim's investment vehicle, and Min Ji-yeon's voice saying, that's not proof, but it's not nothing, and the way she had looked at the information and made a call and been right. She thought about Ethan standing in the alcove at the gala saying I made a mistake, and the specific flavor of the tiredness she'd felt then, which was different from the tiredness she felt now. The gala tiredness had been old, the residue of something that had been over for years, and that she had simply been waiting to officially be done with. This tiredness was new. This was the tiredness of someone who was in the middle of something, not finishing something. She was in the middle of a life that was more complicated and more real and more hers than any life she had lived before, and the complications were not going to simplify, and the realness was not going to soften, and the fact that it was hers was the part she was not going to trade away. Junhyun, she said. Yes. The next time something like this is building, even if you're not sure, even if it's just a shift in the way someone is behaving around you, she met his eyes. You tell me. Yes, he said. Not a concession, a commitment. She nodded. She picked up her bag and stood, and he stood with her, and for a moment they were just two people standing in an office 43 floors above a city that was indifferent to both of them, and she was aware of him the way she was always aware of him, completely, with a specificity that had nothing to do with what he controlled or what his name meant in which rooms. Her phone vibrated again. She looked at it. Unknown number, different from the first one. Seoul area code, but the routing signature, She had learned to read routing signatures in the last 48 hours, was the same relay service. Not Kim Byung-soo, someone else. She turned the phone so Jun-hyun could see the screen. His face went very still. "Don't answer it," he said. "I'm going to answer it." "Amara?" She answered it. The voice was different this time. Older, smoother, with the cadence of someone who had spent decades in rooms where every word was chosen with surgical precision. Not frantic, not threatening in the way the first call had been threatening. Something quieter, and therefore more dangerous. "Mrs. Kang," the voice said. "Kim Byung-soo was a useful instrument, but he was never the architect." A pause, measured and deliberate. "I hope you understand that what you've resolved in the last 48 hours is the surface of something with considerably more depth. And I hope your husband understands that the next conversation will not be conducted through intermediaries." She kept her eyes on Jun-hyun's face as the voice spoke. She watched something move through him. Not fear, the thing that existed in the same register as fear, but was made of different material. The recognition of a specific kind of threat from a specific kind of source. The recognition of someone who knew exactly who was on the other end of the line. The call ended. The room was silent. "Who was that?" she said. Jun-hyun looked at her, and in his face she saw it. The thing he had been managing for months, possibly longer, the weight of something that had been sitting beneath the surface of their life together, patient and cold and waiting. "That," he said quietly, "is the reason I have been very careful about how visible you are." She held his gaze. "Tell me," she said. And she understood, in the full stillness of that office, 43 floors above a city neither of them controlled, that whatever he was about to say was going to change the shape of everything that came after it, and that she was going to have to be something she had not yet fully been in order to stand inside that change and not break. Her hands were steady. She was ready. His name was Choi Sung-won. Jun-hyun said it the way you said a name that had been living in your chest for a long time. Not dramatically, not with the weight of ceremony, but with the specific flatness of someone who had been carrying the word so long it had worn grooves into something internal, and saying it out loud was simply the next thing that needed to happen. Choi Sung-won, 68 years old, former chair of the Choi Industrial Group, a conglomerate that had operated across heavy manufacturing, private security contracting, and, in the layers beneath the layers, the movement of money and leverage through channels that predated Jun-hyun's organization by 2 decades. He had been one of 3 men who, 15 years ago, had given a 30-year-old Kang Jun-hyun the infrastructure he needed to build something real. Not out of generosity. Out of the calculated decision that a controlled, managed descent was more useful than an uncontrolled one. He had spent the years since expecting to be repaid in a specific way. Jun-hyun had spent those same years building toward the point where repayment on Choi's terms was no longer a condition he was required to meet. That point had arrived, or Choi had decided it was arriving, somewhere in the 18 months preceding the Gala. Kim Byung-soo, the regulatory infrastructure, the shell companies, none of it had been Kim's idea. Kim had been the instrument, Choi had been the hand. The Gala had accelerated the timeline. Making Amara visible had been the trigger. Not because Choi cared about Amara specifically, but because a public wife was a public pressure point, and Choi had spent 68 years understanding that the fastest way to move an immovable man was through the thing he could not afford to lose. Jun-hyun told her all of this in the office on the 43rd floor, standing by the window, the city going orange in the late afternoon light. He told her without editing, without the managed version, the full shape of it, and she stood across the room and listened to every word and did not look away from his face once. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "How long have you been managing this?" she said. "Actively, 8 months. Passively, since before we were married. You married me knowing this was building. I married you because I wanted to marry you." His voice didn't change. "The timing was mine to choose. I chose it." She looked at him. "That's not the same as telling me." "No," he said. "It isn't." Another silence. Outside, a plane moved silently across the horizon, its lights beginning to show against the fading sky. "What does he want?" she said. Specifically, not philosophically. "Control of the Busan port logistics contract. It's worth 400 million over 7 years, and it routes through 3 regulatory bodies he has legacy relationships with. He wants me to pull our competing bid and publicly recommend his consortium to the Ministry Selection Committee. And if you don't?" He continues to escalate. My wife's firm, then my own regulatory standing, then, eventually, things that are less professional and more direct. She absorbed this. He's threatening physical harm. Not explicitly. He doesn't need to be explicit. We both understand the language. She walked to the window and stood beside him, not touching, both of them looking out at the city. She could feel the heat coming off the glass even as the sun dropped. Seoul in the early evening, the light turning everything amber and exhausted. "You're not going to give him the contract," she said. It wasn't a question. "No." "What are you going to do?" He turned to look at her. "I'm going to meet with him. In person, tomorrow." Her chest tightened. "Alone?" "With Seo Min-jun, standard protocol." "Jun-hyun, if he's escalating to direct contact, he won't move against me physically. Not at this stage. It's too visible, and the blowback is unmanageable. He's not a reckless man." A pause. "He's a man who has spent 40 years winning by making the people around his targets do the work. He uses systems. He uses intermediaries. He will want to sit across from me and see whether I can be moved before he decides what comes next." "And can you be moved?" He looked at her for a long moment. "What do you think?" She knew the answer. She had known it for 14 months. The answer was no, with a completeness that went all the way down, and the certainty of it was both the thing that made her feel safest inside this marriage and the thing that sometimes, in the small hours, made her feel the specific loneliness of being beside someone whose foundations were simply not accessible in the way that ordinary people's foundations were accessible. "I want to be in the building," she said. "No, not in the room. In the building, within contact range." "Amara, you said you would tell me when something was building." She held his eyes. "This is built. This is the thing itself. I'm not asking to be in the room. I'm asking not to be in our apartment alone waiting for a phone call." She paused. "I've been alone waiting for information before. I know what it costs. I'm asking you not to make me do that again." He was quiet for a moment that she felt in her sternum. "The building," he said. "The lobby level. With Hana and 2 of the security team. Yes. You stay in the lobby." "I stay in the lobby." He nodded once. She went home and she packed her work into the evening, reviewed the documentation she'd sent to Park Hyun-suk, confirmed with David Osei that the Incheon contractor had formally reinstated their agreement, replied to Tanaka's office to confirm Monday, and then sat for a while in the room she used as her workspace, looking at the wall and doing nothing, which was something she allowed herself infrequently and which she had learned in the last 2 years was actually necessary rather than indulgent. She thought about Min Ji-yeon, who had given her the thread that unraveled the first layer of it. She picked up her phone and sent a message. It was Kim Byung-soo, working for someone above him. "It's handled. The first layer of it. Thank you." The response came back quickly. "Be careful with the second layer. The men above the instruments are always more patient." She looked at that message for a while. She thought about Park Hyun-suk saying, "Do the second pass. Every time." And about the way that advice applied to more than engineering assessments. And about the fact that she had, in the last 72 hours, done the second pass on the world she was living inside and found it more structurally complex than the surface suggested. She had always known it was complex. That was different from knowing the specific load-bearing points and where the stress fractures ran. She slept better that night than she expected to. Jun-hyun was already dressed when she woke, moving through the morning with the contained purposefulness of someone who had been through high-stakes mornings before and had learned to treat them like any other kind. He made coffee. He asked her if she'd eaten. She said she would eat at the office. He looked at her for a moment in the way that said he was filing something away, and then he nodded and picked up his jacket. "Noon," he said. "The meeting is at noon." I'll be there by 11:30. He left. She sat in the kitchen with her coffee and the morning light coming through the east window at the particular angle it came through in late autumn, and she thought about the specific strangeness of loving someone whose life required you to be both very close and to maintain a kind of deliberate distance, close enough to know what was real, far enough back not to be consumed by it. She had thought, when she agreed to marry him, that the distance would be the hard part. She had been wrong about that. The distance was manageable. What was harder was the proximity, knowing the person fully enough that his risks became real to you, that the things that could take him from you had faces and names and organizational structures. Kim Byung-soo had been one kind of threat. She had handled that one herself, on her own terms, with her own evidence in her own hands, and that had felt right. Choi Sung-won was another kind entirely. She was at the Kang Group building by 11:22. Hana set her up at a private seating area near the rear of the lobby, away from the entrance traffic, with coffee she didn't particularly want and a view of the elevator bank. Two members of the security team positioned themselves at a distance that was close enough to be present and far enough to be unobtrusive. She opened her laptop and worked. She was not going to sit and stare at the elevator. She was going to be present in the building and also be herself, which was someone who worked, and the two things were not in conflict. Choi Sung-won arrived at 11:58. She knew him by the way the lobby reconfigured itself around his arrival, not with the same quality as Jun-hyun's entrances, which had a kind of focused energy, a room orienting toward a single point. Choi's arrival had a different texture. The lobby didn't orient toward him. It became careful around him, the way spaces became careful around things that were old and heavy and not entirely predictable. He was a compact man, shorter than she'd expected from the description, with white hair cut close and a face that had the particular quality of faces that had been still and watchful for so long that expression had become something they managed, rather than something that simply happened. He wore a dark suit and no tie. He walked with a cane, not because he needed it for balance, she thought, but because it was useful in other ways. He moved toward the elevator bank without looking around the lobby. But in the moment before the elevator doors opened, his eyes moved. A single sweep, practiced and unhurried. And they found her. He looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then he got into the elevator and the doors closed. Those 2 seconds did something to her breathing that she controlled immediately, pressing her left palm flat against the table before she caught herself and released it deliberately. He had known she was there. He had expected her to be there. And he had looked at her not with the assessment she'd expected, not the look of a man identifying a pressure point, but with something more complex than that. Something that, in another context, might have been called curiosity. She worked for 40 minutes. She was reviewing a subsurface analysis report when her phone vibrated. Seo Min-jun. She answered. "He's leaving," Seo said. His voice was neutral in the practiced way. "The meeting concluded 12 minutes ago. Mr. Kang is asking you to come to the 43rd floor. Is he all right?" "Yes." She closed her laptop and went up. The office was the same as it always was, but Jun-hyun was standing by the window with his jacket off, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, which she had learned was the version of physical unwinding he allowed himself when the performance part of something was over and he was in the processing part. He heard her come in and turned. She looked at his face. Read it the way she had learned to read it. Not for the things he showed, which were few and controlled, but for the things that showed anyway, in the line of his jaw and the set of his eyes, in the particular quality of his stillness. He was tired, more tired than she'd seen him. "Sit down," he said. "Are you all right?" "Sit down, Amara." She sat. He stayed standing. He looked at the window for a moment, then back at her. Choi withdrew the pressure on the Busan contract. She waited. He's also withdrawing from the 3 regulatory relationships he's been using. Formally. On paper. Through his legal counsel before end of day. She looked at him. What did it cost? He was quiet for a moment that she felt in the same place she'd felt all the significant silences of the last 72 hours. I agreed to bring one of his logistics subsidiaries into the Busan Consortium as a minority partner, non-controlling stake, below the threshold that requires public disclosure. His revenue share is small. His ability to obstruct is 0. You gave him something. I gave him a way to step back that didn't look like stepping back. He met her eyes. In 40 years of doing this, Choi has never won nothing. Winning nothing means the next move is unpredictable. Winning something small, something that doesn't cost me anything material, means the next move is retirement. She sat with this, turning it over, looking at the structure of it, the way she looked at structures, for the load-bearing logic. He accepted it, she said. He accepted it because he knows you're not movable, because he knows that the next escalation would cost him more than what he gains, and he's 68 years old and he's tired. Junhyun finally moved from the window and sat in the chair across from her. He sat heavily, with the specific weight of someone setting down something they've been carrying for a long time. He asked about you. She stilled. In what way? He said. Junhyun stopped for a moment, and she saw something move across his face that was private and took a second to resolve. He said, your wife went to the ministry herself, with her own documents. She didn't wait for you. And then he said, that was either very brave or very foolish, and I told him it was neither. It was just who she is. The room was quiet. Amara looked at her hands. The left one was flat against her knee, relaxed, and she had not had to make it that way. What did he say to that? She said. He said, then you chose well. A pause. From Choi Sung-won, that is not a small thing to say. She nodded slowly. She thought about Min Ji-yeon's message. The men above the instruments are always more patient. She thought about Choi's eyes in the lobby, the 2 seconds of his gaze, the curiosity in it rather than the assessment. She thought about the fact that a man who had spent 40 years using people as pieces had looked at her and found something that didn't fit neatly into the way he organized the world. Is it over? She said. He looked at her steadily. This part is over. What does the next part look like? Quieter, he said. For a while. She understood the qualification. She had stopped expecting the version of quiet that meant nothing was moving in this life. She had started understanding quiet as the surface of something that was always in motion, and finding the management of that motion to be not comfortable exactly, but livable. More than livable. She stood up and he stood with her, and she crossed the distance between them and put her hand flat against his chest, over his sternum, the same way she'd done the first morning after they were married when she'd woken at 4 and found him sitting in the dark in the kitchen and put her hand on his chest without speaking and felt his heartbeat under her palm and understood that the heartbeat was what mattered, that everything else was the world they navigated around the fact of it. His heart was beating steadily now, a little faster than resting, the body telling the truth that the face wasn't. You were scared, she said. Not an accusation. His hand came up and covered hers. Yes? For me? For you, and for what would have happened to me if something had happened to you. He said it simply, without performance, which was the way the true things came out of him. Stripped, without the weight of articulation, because the weight was already in the thing itself. She stood there for a moment with her hand on his chest and his hand over hers. Then she stepped back. I need to call David, she said, and I need to eat something. I haven't eaten since this morning, and my hands are starting to do the thing. He looked at her. The look she had come to understand as his version of the thing most people expressed with their whole face, which was relief, which was love, which was the specific sensation of a person finding the other person intact at the end of something difficult. There's a restaurant 2 blocks from here, he said. They have the lamb dish you liked in October. I remember. I'll have the car brought around. They left the building together, through the lobby where Hannah looked up and exhaled visibly when she saw them, past the security team who fell into the quiet configuration of people who knew their job and did it without theater, and out into the Seoul afternoon, which was bright and cold and completely indifferent to everything that had just been resolved on the 43rd floor. In the car, she watched the city. She thought about the woman she had been 18 months ago, standing in a hotel room in Chicago surrounded by boxes, looking at the shapes of the things she was about to leave behind, and trying to determine whether what she was moving toward was worth what she was moving away from. She had not been certain. She had been terrified in the specific private way she was terrified of things, which was quietly, with her left hand pressed flat against her leg and her face composed and her mind running the calculation over and over until she ran out of runway and had to make a decision. She had made the decision. She thought about Ethan in the alcove at the gala, saying, "I made a mistake." She thought about Soo-yeon's face, the tired precision of a woman who had married the useful version of a man and was beginning to understand the cost of that. She didn't feel triumphant about either of them. She felt mostly the same thing she'd felt that night, tired and clear. She thought about Min Ji-yeon and Park Hyun-suk and David Osei in Chicago, who had been with her firm since the beginning and who had held steady through 72 hours of professional crisis without fully understanding what was driving it. She thought about the work, the Incheon North section with its secondary verification, the Mapo Bridge reinforcement, the contracts that Monday would begin to move forward on, and she felt, underneath the tiredness, the specific solidity of work that was real, that she had built with her own competence, that existed independently of everything else. That part was hers. It had always been hers. Kim Byung-soo had tried to use it as a weapon against her and had discovered, in the process, that the thing he was trying to weaponize was precisely the thing that was hardest to destroy. Work done with actual rigor, documented with actual care, conducted with the stubborn professional ethic of someone who had decided, early and completely, that cutting corners was a form of self-betrayal she was not willing to commit. The restaurant was warm and small, the kind of place that didn't need to perform its quality because the quality was in the food, and the food didn't need help. They were seated in a corner by a woman who recognized Jun-hyun and made no production of it. He ordered the lamb. She ordered it too. She drank water. He drank tea. They sat in the specific, comfortable quiet of people who had been through something together and didn't need to process it immediately, who could set it down for a moment and just eat. Halfway through the meal, she said, "I want to bring Min Ji-yeon on as a formal consultant to the firm. She has a skill set that proved relevant, and I don't want to need her again urgently and have to start from cold." He looked up. "Professional relationship." "Yes, on retainer. Her rate is high, but it's worth it." He nodded. "That's a good decision." "I know." He almost smiled. The version of a smile that lived in the slight change around his eyes, which she had learned to read the way she'd learned to read everything about him, with patience, with attention, with the willingness to look past the surface for the structure underneath. After dinner, they walked the 2 blocks back to where the car was waiting, and the night had come fully down over the city, Seoul in its after-dark configuration, loud and lit and moving with the particular energy of a place that had been through more than most cities and had decided to keep going anyway. She put her arm through his. He didn't look at her, but his arm pressed slightly inward, a small adjustment that was the body saying what it said. In the car going home, she thought about the phone call that had started all of this. The unknown voice outside the tower, the 48 hours, the cold dropping certainty of understanding that the ground had changed. She thought about who she had been standing on that pavement, holding the dead phone, and who she was now, 5 days later, in this car with the city going past the windows. Not a different person. The same person, but with more of herself visible. To herself, primarily. The layers that the last 5 days had stripped back were not layers she could put back on, and she didn't want to. She knew more about the world she was living inside. She knew its pressure points and its fault lines and the specific weight of what it asked of the people who inhabited it. She knew the distance between what she could control and what she couldn't, and she had found, in the process of the last 5 days, that the distance was livable, not comfortable, not without cost, but livable, because she was not navigating it from the outside, pressing her face against the glass and trying to understand the architecture from a remove. She was inside it, entirely and with full knowledge, and the person beside her in this car, the man who had spent 15 years building something in a world that ate the uncertain, who had looked at her across a lobby 18 months ago and made a decision and had not reversed it once, not through the gala and the phone call and Kim Byung-soo and Choi Sung-won, not through any of it. That person was hers in the same complete way that she was his, not because she needed him to be, because she had chosen it, in full knowledge, with her left hand relaxed and her eyes open. The car pulled up to the tower. The night security team ran the standard check. The doors opened. The lobby was quiet and lit, the city visible through the glass walls, enormous and ongoing. She stepped out of the car and looked up at the building. 45 floors of glass and steel that contained, among the 10,000 things it contained, the particular apartment that had become, in the 14 months since she moved into it, more genuinely home than any place she'd lived since she was young enough. That home was something that happened to you rather than something you chose. She had chosen this. She had kept choosing it. She was going to keep choosing it tomorrow and the day after, and through whatever the next version of difficult turned out to look like. Because difficult was the condition, not the exception, in a life that was actually being lived rather than managed from a safe distance. Junhyun was beside her. She felt him there without looking. "Come on," she said. They went inside. The elevator rose. The city fell away below them, level by level, until at the top the lights of Seoul spread out in every direction like something spilled and beautiful and impossible to contain, and she stood at the window for a moment before she took off her coat, just looking at it, at all that light, all that ongoing human insistence on continuing, and felt something in her chest that was quieter than happiness and more durable. She had eaten. She was fine. She was exactly where she had chosen to be, and that, in the end, was the whole of it.